is my review of Resurrection of the Daleks, the fourth story of the 21st season of classic Doctor Who, starring Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor. Resurrection of the Daleks is the 134th story overall. It's 4 parts long or 2 parts long, depending what version you watch, and it's written by Eric Sayward. And Resurrection of the Daleks is the first story of the Dalek Civil War trilogy that was pretty much the main storyline for the last 3 Dalek stories in classic Who. So this is basically the war between the Imperial Daleks, created by, I think it was Davros, and the Renegade Daleks that were created by, not created by, they were pretty much loyal to the Dalek Emperor, and I'll get more into that later on. So the plot of this story is as follows. The TARDIS is dragged down the time corridor, forcing the Doctor, Tegan and Turlough to materialize in a disused part of London in 1984. The corridor links Earth with a battlecruiser in the future that contains the Doctor's oldest enemy, the Daleks. Having lost the war of the Movellans, only one person now can stop the evil race. With shocking consequences for the Doctor, it's time for the Daleks to resurrect their creator Davros. So that is the plot of Resurrection of the Daleks. I think Resurrection of the Daleks was a very fantastic story and a great way to signal the end, the beginning of the end of the Peter Davison era, and a good way to kick off the Dalek War trilogy. And season 21 is pretty much starting to shape up here, even though we're pretty much 4 stories in, it's very much starting to shape up now. The production was quite good, once again set in contemporary London and then the ship in the future. We do get to see some fantastic location filming, especially the wharf and the docks they filmed, which is filmed on Bermondsey, but now I think it's real residential and commercial as opposed to how derelict it looked in the story. The sets were quite good as well, especially the Dalek ship and the warehouse where most of the story took place at. The script was quite good, there was a very good continuity as well. Matthew Robinson's direction was very good, and so I commend that. The plot was great. I really liked how tense and dark the story was, and it was definitely one of the darkest Dalek stories I've had in a while, probably on par with Genesis of the Daleks, so to speak. And this story was pretty much kicked off the Imperial Renegade Civil War storyline that was fought between the Imperial Daleks. As I mentioned before, they were loyal to Davros, and Davros created them himself, and the Renegade Daleks, these were also Daleks that were created by Davros in Genesis, but then they were very much loyal to the Dalek Emperor. Though we don't see the Imperial Daleks until the next Dalek story, so it's just the Grey Daleks we have just here. Davros makes his return, and this is where he reveals that he wants to create his own loyal breed of Daleks, which is, as I mentioned not too long ago, they were the Imperial Daleks, because he didn't want the Daleks to betray him after what happened in Genesis, and the Grey Daleks, the Renegade Daleks, saw these new Daleks as impure because they were created in a way that the Daleks did not see fit. But we'll get into that later on. There was some very good continuity as we find out the outcome of the Dalek and Movellan War from Destiny of the Daleks, and the Movellans actually defeated the Daleks by creating the Movellan virus, which pretty much affected the Daleks. And once again, we do have another story of a very high death count, and at the time, Resurrection of the Daleks had a reputation for having a death count higher than the first Terminator film. And this time we're getting humans and even Dalek getting killed left, right and centre, and the only survivors of the story was the Doctor, Tegan, Turlough, Lytton, Davros and 2 other police officers. I liked it because it did contribute to how dark the story was, but at the same time I think it was just a little bit excessive. It was actually first broadcast in 1984 in the 2-part 45-minute format, which becomes the norm in season 22 only because the BBC at the time was covering the Winter Olympics, but it was repeated in the usual 4-part format in international broadcasts and in the UK afterwards. So I personally prefer the 4-part 25-minute format for this story because I think the pacing is quite better, and compared to the 2-part version where it just feels it's a bit too. It does kind of stretch it out a bit. It does drag on for a bit, but the 4-part version actually breaks up the story a bit easier, and that is actually one of my main criticisms of season 22, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So I think Resurrection of the Daleks had some very good moments. memorable moments, such as the Doctor seemingly betrayed by Steen and Tegan's exit, and the Doctor pretty much shoving the Dalek with the other soldiers, a Dalek out of the warehouse, and you just see the Dalek just falling down and just exploding as soon as it hit the ground. I did find the scene when Tegan was trying to escape the policemen who were cloned by the Daleks. So she was trying to escape from the warehouse, and then she tries to get help, but then the two policemen shoot the guy that was just looking. Just he was on the beach. He was on the beach trying to with a metal detector, and Tegan was trying to call for help, but then they just shot him. So I also like the scene in the prison ship where the Daleks was fighting with Stars and the troops of the prison ship, and the Daleks using the Doctor's memories for their Doctor clone, and we get a montage of all the companions and the Doctors and so much more. So on to the acting, which was brilliant. Peter Davison is definitely on the roll here, and I do think the quality of the scripts he received for his last few stories definitely gave him the confidence, and the writers were able to capture how Davison envisioned his Doctors to be. We do see a bit of a darker side of the Fifth Doctor, and he's a bit ruthless here as well because he pretty much understands the severity of the situation and what the Daleks are intending to do with Earth and the Doctor and the Daleks and what the Daleks intend to do to the Doctor himself. So this hence why he pointed the gun at Davros with the intent to kill him, as the Doctor had no other choice but to go through this, but Davros was not going to change, and the Doctor still believed that the Imperial Daleks being created wouldn't even change a thing. But the Doctor couldn't go through the killing of Davros, and Davros himself knew it, and that was a very powerful piece of acting. And I also really liked the acting during Tegan's exit scene. It was very emotional as well. You can tell that Peter Davison was quite heartbroken, as the Doctor was as well, but obviously the Doctor being the Doctor, he didn't want to dwell on it too much and just hurried Turlough back into the TARDIS and they all just left. Janet Fielding was excellent, and I do think that this is one of her best performances as Tegan, as Fielding once again really conveyed how traumatizing the traveling of the Doctor really is, especially with all the deaths and on top of the personal hell Tegan went through in her early adventures. And she was definitely going through it in the story, which is one of the reasons why she decided to stop traveling with the Doctor. And she suffers a concussion during a mini scuffle with the Dalek at the start of part two, which knocks her out, and then she recovers in the warehouse, and then as soon as the other troops come back to take Tegan to the Dalek ship, the professor that was with her ended up getting killed, and Tegan pretty much had no choice to follow the policeman into the time corridor. Mark Strickson did an alright job. After being allowed to shine in Frontios, he's unfortunately put in the back burner. He disappears early on and wanders into the Dalek's time corridor, where he met the surviving members of the prison ship, well, the troops anyways, and then the Daleks were hoping to capture Turlough so they can try and capture the Doctor themselves, but that doesn't really happen. I did like how silent he was when Tegan announced her decision that she was going to leave the TARDIS, and he quietly shook her hand and she just pretty much went away. And Paul, probably due to the bleakness of the story, Lucky Chameleon was left behind in the TARDIS, probably with his feet up somewhere, blissfully unaware of the high death count of this story and how the Daleks were there. Sidecast, we had some characters who are more memorable than others. So first off, we have Lytton, an alien leading a group of Dalek troopers in order to rescue Davros after Davros was put into stasis. He was on their side for most of the story, even up to when Davros wanted to usurp the control from the Supreme Dalek. Lytton survives at the end of the story, and I actually do see him again in Attack of the Cybermen, this time working for the Cybermen, or so it seems. Then we had Steen. He is a Dalek duplicate who was revealed to have been working for the Daleks. He encountered the Doctor and his companions on Earth where he was helping them, but he was used to bring back the Doctor through the Daleks' time corridor because he was struggling to resist the Daleks' conditioning, and the conditioning came back when he took the Doctor into the Dalek ship. He struggles for most of the story, giving us the classic "I can't stand the confusion in my mind" meme, which was quite funny as well because of the delivery of that line. And at the end, he actually sacrifices himself by activating the prison station's self-destruct button, without which kills the Daleks. He was voted as the best side character in this story because I really like the struggle that he had with his condition. And when the Daleks tried to exterminate him, he was very much unfazed. Like, they shoot him and he just treats it as if it was nothing and continues to proceed with the self-destruct sequence. I thought that was quite badass from him. Then we have Styles, a medical officer on the board the prison ship where Davros is imprisoned. After surviving the Daleks attack, her and Mercer tried to activate the self-destruct sequence, but she was killed by Litton's men. Then we have Colonel Archer. He was in command of the bomb disposal squad after the bomb was unearthed around the warehouse area. But bombs were actually canisters of the Magellan virus. He, alongside Sergeant Calder, were killed by the policeman that Litton was with, and they were replaced by Dalek clones. The clone killed Leia when she resisted going aboard the Dalek ship when they were requested to. Then we have Professor Laird. She accompanied Archer in investigating the bomb. After Tegan was incapacitated, she had to nurse Tegan back to health when the doctor went through the time corridor. Her and Tegan tried to escape, but they were caught by the cloned Archer, where she was unfortunately killed. Then we have Kirsten, who was played by Dirty Dan Watts a year before Leslie Grantham joined EastEnders. Kirsten was a mechanical engineer working with Litton and was responsible for repairing and adjusting Davros' life support system. But Davros used his mind against him as an agent to try and gain control of the Daleks from the Supreme Dalek, and he was killed by the Daleks that were loyal to the Supreme Dalek. Then we had Mercer, a crew member of the prison ship, the Davros was held prisoner. He finds Tuller after he accidentally boarded the ship, and thanks to the time corridor. He and Styles were later killed by Litton's men when they tried to activate the self-destruct sequence. And finally, we have Galloway. He was a prisoner of the Daleks. He and Steen escaped, but unfortunately, he was killed by a Dalek trooper. And of course, we have the enemies of the story, namely being the Daleks. The Daleks were still recuperating after the loss to the Movellans in the Dalek-Movellan War, and they were very vulnerable to the Movellan virus, which pretty much is an instant kill for them. They wanted to try and invade Earth, and they wanted to break into the prison ship to free Davros, who has been in stasis ever since Destiny of the Daleks, so they can force Davros to help them find a cure for the Movellan virus, despite the fact that they didn't know that Davros was planning to betray the Supreme Dalek and create a loyal race of his own Daleks. And finally, the Daleks wanted to clone the Doctor and his Tegan and Turlo, so they can send who had been somehow cloned already. And so they wanted to send the cloned trio to the Gallifreyan High Council to try and assassinate the president of the High Council of Gallifrey. The Daleks were very good here, so to say the least. Even though I did find them to be quite they were quite wimpy, and they were easily destroyed by the Movellan virus, and there was also that part of the story where the Dalek was pretty much thrown out of the warehouse window, and I did find them quite weak there. And also with the Daleks, with their plot trying to send the Doctor and his companions to Gallifrey to assassinate the president, Russell T Davies did state that this was another cause of what caused the great time war between the Daleks and the Time Lords in New Who. And finally, we have Davros. Davros was still in stasis after the events of Destiny and the Daleks, and he discovered that the Daleks had lost the Movellan War. He wanted control of the Daleks and was willing to go as far as taking that control from the Supreme Dalek by wiping the Daleks out completely himself with the Movellan virus, therefore allowing him to create a new breed of Daleks that will be loyal to him, and these were the Imperial Daleks. Davros told the Doctor that he made an error of making the Daleks ruthless, and his new Daleks would try and understand emotion, but in a way that would actually make them better killers, which prompted the Doctor to want to gun down Davros because the Daleks would pretty much be not necessarily ruthless, but they would just be like not necessarily killers of conscience, but they would be more like assassins, so to speak, which the Doctor obviously didn't like. Davros escapes the prison station, and even though he was affected with the Movellan virus, but he somehow survived. Davros was great here, and he's actually now being voiced by Terry Malloy, and who I think is the best Davros, because Davros was very hammy, and there were moments where he would literally be breaking the fourth wall. He would be just be like stating what he wanted to do with the Daleks. He said, "The Daleks are going to take over the universe," and he's literally like foaming at the mouth, and I actually think that adds charm to Malloy's Davros, so to speak. So on to the faults of the story. I do think there were a fair bit, but they don't really hinder the story as much as other stories did. I did have an issue with Davros and why he was asking what happened in the Magellan War. Not necessarily because the Daleks losing to the Magellan virus, but Davros was literally in Destiny of the Daleks and he kind of witnessed the Magellan War for himself. It didn't really make sense as to why Davros was asking what happened. Though this was probably done to try and jog the audience's memory a bit because it had been quite a few years between Destiny of the Daleks and this story yet, so yeah, and I do think the Daleks were made a bit weak here. And some of it that were a bit destroyed in my opinion. Which, too much of the other Daleks were destroyed in my opinion throughout the story, not necessarily at the end. So now we're at the part of the review where we'll be talking about a major event happening at the end, which is the exit of Tegan Javanka. After the day received, although with a lot of fatalities, this was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back for Tegan, and decides to make a very swift exit by informing the Doctor and told her that she wishes to stay behind on Earth. As she puts it in her own words, to stop being fun. Although I have criticized exits like this in the past, but it did work for Tegan because she did go through a lot. Like, she went through a lot during her time in the TARDIS. Even when she came on board the TARDIS, it was already tragic because her auntie Vanessa was killed by the Master. Then she went through a traumatic ordeal with the Mara, two of them in fact, and they were very severe. Then she obviously witnesses that her friend Adric die at the hands of trying to save Earth from the Cybermen. And I wouldn't be surprised if Tegan actually ended up with some sort of PTSD. Whilst I was watching the odd story here and there, I did feel that Tegan was a bit off, but then obviously watching the Davison story in order, obviously including Logopolis, Tegan did grow me quite a fair bit, and it did make me like her a lot more because she's very, at the end of the day, she's human because she's literally the only human aboard the TARDIS because we had the Doctor's the Time Lord, Nessa who's a Tracker Knight, and Adric, he's not even from this universe, he's from another universe even. And obviously I have Turlo, an alien schoolboy, so it's just very concept term. Obviously seeing all these people wanting to destroy Earth, it's pretty obvious that Tegan does not want this to happen and tries to push the Doctor to try and prevent this from happening. But I do think that this exit pretty much allowed Tegan to her character to go full circle, and I said this before several times, but yeah, her character does come full circle here. Hence the Braveheart Tegan line that the Doctor would always repeat during her time in the TARDIS. Well, unfortunately, things got way too much for her, and it's a very human thing to do when you reach your limit. It's just best to just throw the towel in and call it a day. And I think Janet Tegan did a very good job in portraying Tegan, and she stayed in the show for 3 years, and she was pretty much she is one of the longest serving companions in Doctor Who history, and she was pretty much in the Peter Davison. Her presence is pretty much felt throughout the Peter Davison era, even after her exit. Even in the last two stories, her presence is pretty much felt, or at least referenced to, which pretty much means that her impact is undeniable. And Tegan, we actually do see her return almost 3 times, I think. Actually, yeah, we see her return 3 times. The first return, obviously, in the caves of Anjazani, when she's pretty much saying to the Doctor she shouldn't die. The second time, she returns in a Jim Will Fix It special with the Sixth Doctor because Nicola Bryant was unavailable, so this is where she meets the Centurions. And her third return, this is pretty much almost 40 years after the story aired. She returns in The Power of the Doctor, where Judy Whittaker's final story, where she reunites with the 13th Doctor and has a reunion with the 5th Doctor although it was in a holograph format, which was a very beautiful scene. That was one of my favorite scenes from that special, but when the time comes, we'll talk about it. So I think Tegan Javanka was a very amazing companion, and I shall miss you whilst I'm watching the other stories of Classic Who. So in my opinion, I think Resurrection of the Daleks is a very powerful Dalek story, so to speak. Even though the Daleks were made a bit weak here and there, but it was a very brilliant story. Definitely one of the best Dalek stories in Classic Who, and had a very brilliant exit with Tegan, and I think Davros was written quite well. This is probably one of his best stories. So and a great way to kick off the Dalek War trilogy. So I will give Resurrection of the Daleks a 9 out of 10. So my next review will be Planet of Fire, which sees another unraveling towards the end. Another unraveling for the Peter Davison era. In this instant, Turlough departs, and we have a new companion joining the TARDIS, which is Perpigillian Perry Brown. So look out for that. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what you thought of this story and this review. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Until then, see you later.